He didn't come back to fight. He didn't come back to beg. He came back to do the one thing no one in Seoul's most dangerous criminal empire ever expected: disappear and leave behind the only proof that Lee Min-jae was never as untouchable as he believed. It was 4 a.m. when Han Seo-jun returned to the gate that had once swallowed him whole. 9 months ago, he had been dragged from this same iron entrance, shoved into the cold by men who wore Lee Min-jae's orders like armor and never once looked him in the eye. He had left screaming. He came back in silence. He was thinner now. The jacket on his back was 2 sizes too large, borrowed from a coworker who hadn't asked questions. His hands, the hands that had once traced the most feared face in Korea in the dark, were trembling as he lowered himself to his knees on the frozen pavement. In his arms was a baby boy. Small, fragile, wrapped in the only blue blanket Seo-jun had been able to afford. But the face, even at 3 weeks old, even in the gray pre-dawn dark, was unmistakably Lee Min-jae's. The set of the jaw, the quiet, commanding stillness, the weight of something enormous compressed into something impossibly small. Seo-jun pressed his lips to the baby's forehead and held them there for a long moment. Long enough to memorize what it felt like, because he knew he would never do it again. He tucked a folded letter beneath the blanket. He did not sign it with love. He signed it with the only thing he had left, the truth. Then Han Seo-jun stood up, turned his back on the gate, and walked into the city that was already consuming him. And he did not look back once. He had given his son a future. He just hadn't survived long enough to be part of it. What Lee Min-jae did when he found that baby, and what he became when he read that letter, will change everything you think you know about power, sacrifice, and the kind of love that destroys a man completely. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers and tell me where you're watching from. The gate had not changed. Han Seo-jun had told himself, during the long walk from the bus stop, that he would feel nothing when he saw it again. He had rehearsed numbness the way other people rehearse speeches. Carefully, repeatedly, in the dark of a one-room apartment with a newborn on his chest and nowhere left to go. He had been so certain the cold in his body had finally reached his chest and finished the job. But then the iron came into view through the pre-dawn fog, tall and black and absolute, and his legs nearly stopped working entirely. He kept walking. The compound sat at the end of a private road in the hills above the city, the kind of address that didn't appear on maps and wasn't spoken above a whisper in certain circles. Security cameras tracked every angle. Motion sensors lined the perimeter wall. And standing just inside the gate, half-sheltered from the February wind by a narrow guardhouse, was a young man in a black uniform. Barely 22, Seo-jun guessed, with the kind of face that still looked startled by the weight of what he'd been handed. The guard saw him coming and straightened immediately, one hand moving toward his radio. Seo-jun stopped a few feet from the gate and shifted the bundle in his arms closer to his chest. The baby stirred but didn't wake. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Seo-jun said. His voice came out quieter than he intended, scraped thin by 3 weeks of almost no sleep and a chest cold he hadn't been able to shake. "I just need a minute." The guard stared at the bundle, then at Seo-jun's face, then back at the bundle. His hand hovered near the radio without touching it. "Sir, this is private property. You need to. I know whose property it is." Seo-jun lowered himself carefully to his knees on the pavement, the way his body had learned to move since the birth, slowly, with deliberate attention to every joint, every pull of muscle that hadn't fully healed. The cold from the stone came through immediately. He barely felt it. "I'm not going inside. I just need 1 minute." The guard took a half-step forward. "What are you? What is that?" "His name is Jiho." Seo-jun settled the baby onto the ground in front of him, keeping both hands around the blue blanket until he was certain the positioning was right, that the wind wasn't reaching the small, exposed crescent of Jiho's face. "Lee Jiho. You can tell him I chose it. Or don't. That part doesn't matter." The silence that followed was the kind that had texture. The guard's breathing, the distant hum of the city below, the faint sound of Jiho making the small unconscious sounds that newborns make when the world presses too close. "Sir." The guard's voice had shifted. The professional edge was gone. What replaced it was something younger and more honest. "Sir, what are you doing?" "Something I practiced." Seo-jun reached into his jacket and withdrew the letter, folded 4 times, sealed with tape because he hadn't been able to find an envelope he could afford to spare. He tucked it carefully beneath the edge of the blanket, just enough that it wouldn't blow away, just enough that whoever picked the baby up would find it immediately. "Something I've been thinking about for 3 months. You can't just you can't leave him here. He's not being left." Seo-jun looked up at the guard then, and the directness of it seemed to stop the young man completely. He's being delivered. There is a difference. His father lives behind that gate. His father can give him everything I can't. He paused. I need you to call it in the moment I'm gone. Not before. After. Do you understand? The guard stared at him. His jaw was tight. His eyes, and Seo Jun noted this with something that was almost gratitude, were genuinely distressed in the way that only very young people's eyes still are, before the work teaches them to close that particular door. I can't just let you walk away from a newborn at the gate. I have to. You have to call it in after I leave, Seo Jun said again, gently, the way he had learned to speak to Jiho in the nights when the crying wouldn't stop. Not louder, not harder, just more certain. That's all you have to do. He will be safe the moment your call goes through. You know that. This compound has a medical team that could run a hospital. He will be warmer than he has ever been in an hour. He dropped his eyes back to the baby. He needs that. He needs that more than he needs me. The guard didn't respond. Seo Jun could hear him breathing. He allowed himself 30 more seconds on his knees. He counted them without meaning to, the way you count things when you're trying to make your body behave against every instinct it has. He looked at Jiho's face, the jaw that was already Min Jae's, the lashes dark against pale new skin, the tiny fist that had worked free of the blanket and was curled against cold air that Seo Jun immediately, carefully tucked back in. You are going to be so loved, he whispered. The words came out cracked at the edges. He let them. You are going to have everything. A warm room and people who will never let anything touch you. His throat tightened around the next part, and he pushed through it anyway, because Jiho deserved to hear it even if Jiho would never remember. I need you to forgive me for this when you're older. I need you to understand that this is the only way I know how to love you correctly. He pressed his lips to the baby's forehead one final time. Then Han Seo Jun stood up. His knees screamed. His chest was a locked room with something enormous throwing itself against the door from the inside. He pulled his jacket tighter, turned away from the gate, and began to walk. Wait, the guard called behind him. Wait, at least tell me your name. For the report. I need. He knows my scent, Seo Jun said, without turning around. That's enough. He heard the guard make a sound that might have been an attempt to say something else, and then he heard the radio crackle to life. And he walked faster, not because he was afraid of being stopped, but because he understood that if he slowed down now, even slightly, his legs would remember what the rest of him was pretending not to know. Behind him, a newborn slept in the cold outside the gate of the most dangerous man in Seoul. Behind him, a young guard spoke into his radio with a shaking voice and said words that would wake an empire. Han Seo Jun turned the corner at the bottom of the private road and disappeared into the fog of the city below, heading back toward a factory shift that started in 40 minutes and a life that had just become, in every meaningful sense, completely unrecognizable. He did not look back. He had promised himself he wouldn't. He kept that promise, at least. The bus didn't come. Seo Jun stood at the stop for 11 minutes. He knew because he watched the digital clock on the convenience store across the street with the focused attention of someone who had nothing left to think about and needed his mind pointed at something harmless. 11 minutes in February, without gloves, with a chest cold that had settled somewhere deep behind his sternum and was making quiet, persistent threats every time he breathed too deeply. When the bus finally arrived, he took the last seat at the back and pressed his forehead against the cold window and watched Seoul slide past in the gray pre-dawn light. The shuttered restaurants, the stacked delivery boxes, the occasional figure moving through the streets with the particular purposefulness of someone who had somewhere to be and no patience left for the city's indifference. His arms felt wrong. That was the thing nobody had warned him about. He had expected the pain, the exhaustion, the way his body still moved like something that hadn't finished putting itself back together after the birth. But nobody had mentioned that his arms would feel the absence like a phantom weight, that they would keep adjusting, keep curving inward at the elbow, reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. He pressed them flat against his thighs and stared at the window. You made the right choice. He had been saying it since he turned the corner at the bottom of the private road. He had said it quietly, internally, with the same repetitive determination he had used to get through the worst nights of the pregnancy. The ones where the money ran out and the heating cut off and Jiho had moved inside him like a question Seo Jun didn't know how to answer. He had gotten through those nights. He would get through this. You made the right choice. He is warm now. He is safe now. You made the right choice. The factory was in Guro District, 40 minutes by bus and 7 minutes on foot through a network of back streets that Seo Jun had memorized in the first week, because memorizing things gave him a sense of control that nothing else did. It was a packaging facility, boxes mostly for electronics components. and the work required standing for 8 hours at a line that moved at a pace designed for people whose bodies were not 3 weeks postpartum and running on 4 hours of broken sleep a night. His supervisor's name was Manager O, a blunt woman in her 50s who had hired him without asking too many questions and had been quietly, grudgingly decent about it ever since. She was waiting near the entrance when he arrived, clipboard in hand, and she looked him over with the assessing expression she used on machinery she suspected was about to cause problems. "You're 7 minutes late." The bus is always something." She made a mark on her clipboard. "You look terrible." "I'm fine. You've been saying that for 2 weeks. You look worse every time." She studied him for a moment, and something in her expression shifted slightly. Not softening exactly, but adjusting. "Did something happen this morning? You look like something happened." "Nothing happened," Seo-jun said. "I'm fine. I can work." She held his gaze for a second longer than was comfortable, then turned back toward the facility entrance. "Bae called in sick. You're on box sealing today instead of sorting. Less lifting." He understood that this was her version of kindness and accepted it without comment. The line was already running when he took his position. The noise inside the facility was the kind that occupied the parts of the brain that might otherwise be used for feeling things: machinery, conveyor belts, the pneumatic hiss of the sealing equipment, the overlapping conversations of the morning shift finding their rhythm. Seo-jun had been grateful for it initially. Today it wasn't quite loud enough. By the second hour, he was aware that something was wrong. Not wrong in the way of exhaustion or grief or the ordinary physical protests his body had been making since the birth. Wrong in a deeper, more biological sense, a warmth building under his skin that had nothing to do with the temperature of the facility, a restlessness in his joints that made the repetitive motion of the work feel increasingly unbearable. He recognized it with a dread that settled cold and heavy in his stomach. His heat cycle. Overdue by nearly 3 weeks. He had tracked it obsessively during the pregnancy, noted the way the hormonal disruption of carrying an alpha's child had pushed everything off schedule, told himself it would regulate after the birth. It hadn't, and now his body, apparently having decided that the morning had not been sufficiently devastating, had chosen this moment to make its position known. He kept working. The warmth got worse. By the 3rd hour, the woman working beside him, a quiet woman named Yoonji who had never asked him anything personal and whom he liked enormously for it, glanced over twice in the space of 5 minutes and then leaned slightly closer. "Are you all right?" she said, under the noise of the machinery. "Fine. You're sweating. It's warm in here." "It's not actually. It's the same temperature it always is." A pause. "Seo-jun, you're an omega." He didn't answer. "I'm just saying," she said carefully, the way someone navigates a conversation they already know is unwelcome, "that if you're in preheat, you need to go home. You know that, right? You know what happens if you push through it in an environment like this." "I know what happens." "Then why are you still standing here?" "Because I can't afford to lose the shift. Because Jiho's last formula purchase cleaned out the emergency fund, and I haven't figured out yet that I don't need formula anymore. Because if I go home to that apartment, I will have to sit in the silence where he used to be, and I am not ready for that." He said none of this. "I'll be fine until the break," he said instead. "I'll reassess at break." Yoonji looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone who has decided that arguing further is both pointless and unkind. She turned back to her station. She didn't mention it again. He made it to the break. He sat on a low bench in the back corridor where the staff kept their lockers, elbows on his knees, and breathed through the heat that was no longer building but pressing. Insistent, invasive, designed by biology for a purpose that had become, in his current circumstances, a particular kind of cruelty. His body was looking for something it wasn't going to find. His body hadn't received the message yet. "You made the right choice." The words felt thinner than they had on the bus. Still true. He was still certain they were true. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and held them there and thought about Jiho's face in the pre-dawn dark. The small fist, the dark lashes, the jaw that was going to grow into something formidable. Warm now. Safe now. Seo-jun dropped his hands. Stood up. Walked back to the line. Told himself again. Kept moving. The meeting had been running for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and Lee Min-jae had not blinked at a single number. This was the thing about him that his lieutenants had learned to stop remarking on. The absolute stillness. Other men in his position performed authority through movement, through gesture, through the deliberate theater of making people wait while they considered. Min-jae simply sat at the head of the table and listened, and the quality of his attention was so complete and so unsparing that most people found it more unsettling than any raised voice could ever be. The conference room occupied the top floor of the compound's east wing, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, the city spread below like a circuit board, every light a transaction, every shadow an arrangement of some kind. Min-jae had chosen the location himself when he rebuilt the compound 6 years ago. He liked to see the thing he ran. He liked to remember its scale. The Incheon arrangement needs to move before the 15th, said Park Tae-won, his logistics head, gesturing at the projection on the far wall. If we miss that window, we're looking at a 6-week delay and Choi's people will use it. Choi's people are already using it, said another voice from the left side of the table. The Mapo distribution point had 2 of his runners in the vicinity on Tuesday. 2 runners is surveillance, not a move. He's not ready to. He's always ready. That's the point. He just prefers to let us think otherwise. Min-jae let them run the back and forth for another 30 seconds, tracking each thread, noting where the logic held and where it was held together by assumption rather than intelligence. Then he said quietly, "The Incheon window moves to the 12th. Tae-won, I want the contingency route mapped by tomorrow morning. Choi's surveillance means he's planning for our original timeline, which means changing it costs us nothing and costs him the 2 weeks he spent positioning." Silence around the table. Then a murmur of assent and the sound of pens moving. The door opened. Min-jae registered it immediately, not the opening itself, but the quality of it. His head of security, Kim Jun, was not a man who opened doors carelessly. In 4 years, Jun had never entered a strategy session without knocking. He had never entered one with that particular expression on his face. Not the tight professional composure of a threat assessment, not the controlled urgency of a perimeter breach. Something else. Something Jun was visibly struggling to categorize. "Sir." Jun's voice was level, but his eyes cut briefly and meaningfully to the other men around the table. "I need a word." Min-jae studied him for exactly 2 seconds. "Clear the room." No one argued. They filed out with the practiced efficiency of men who had learned that Min-jae's instructions came once, and that the second version was considerably less courteous. When the door closed, Jun crossed to the table and placed a folded letter on the glass surface in front of Min-jae. It was sealed with tape, slightly creased at the edges, and it carried a scent that hit Min-jae somewhere behind the sternum before his conscious mind had finished identifying it. He didn't reach for it. "Tell me," he said. Approximately 40 minutes ago, the North Gate camera picked up an individual approaching on foot. Young male, slight build, on foot from the direction of the lower road. Jun's voice maintained its professional register with visible effort. He was carrying an infant. He placed the child on the ground at the gate, left the letter underneath the blanket, and left the scene before Officer Shin could detain him. Shin called it in per protocol and secured the child immediately. The room was very quiet. "The infant," Min-jae said. "Newborn, sir. 3 to 4 weeks, the medical team estimates. The child is currently in the east receiving room. Dr. Yoon is with him. Healthy." A pause that lasted half a second too long. "Dr. Yoon has concerns about the child's weight and core temperature. She's addressing them. She said to tell you that the baby is stable and she expects him to remain so." Min-jae's eyes dropped to the letter on the table. The scent was unmistakable even now. Even after 9 months, even through the tape and the creases and whatever particular suffering had pressed itself into the paper along with the words. His mind, which had spent years training itself to process information without emotional interference, was currently experiencing something he didn't have an efficient word for. "The person who left him," Min-jae said. Description: male, 5'9", slim build, wearing a gray jacket, dark trousers. Face was partially obscured on the north camera, but Officer Shin got a clear look. Jun hesitated. "Shin said he was an Omega, sir. Said he could tell from. He said the man was in preheat and trying to hold it together." Shin's words. The muscle in Min-jae's jaw moved once. Did Shin try to stop him? He attempted to engage. The individual asked him to wait until he had left the scene before calling it in. Shin complied. Another pause. "Sir, Shin is 22. He said the man got on his knees to put the baby down, and that Shin said he's never seen anyone look like that. Like they were doing the hardest thing they'd ever done and had decided not to survive it." Min-jae said nothing for a long moment. His hand moved to the letter on the table. He didn't open it yet. "Who else knows about the child?" "Shin. Myself. Dr. Yoon and her assistant. No one else. Keep it that way. No one in this compound discusses this without my direct authorization. Not with each other, not with family, not in passing. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Where is Donghyun? Something moved across Jun's face, too quick to name, but Min-jae filed it away. Deputy Director Ryu left the compound at 2200. He's not been back. I'm aware of when he left. Min-jae picked up the letter. I asked where he is. His driver logged a destination in Gangnam. He's not reachable by the secondary line. Find him. Min-jae stood, and the movement had a quality to it that Jun, in 4 years, had learned to respect the way you respect weather. Not with fear exactly, but with a clear-eyed understanding of what it was capable of. Tell him there's nothing urgent. Tell him I'll see him in the morning briefing. Tell him whatever keeps him calm until I've read this. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Jun moved toward the door. His hand was on the handle when Min-jae spoke again. Quieter this time, the words directed less at Jun and more at the letter in his hands. The child. What does he look like? Jun turned back. He seemed to understand that this question was different from the others. He looks like you, sir, he said simply. Officer Shin said so. Dr. Yoon said so. I went to see for myself. A beat. There wasn't any doubt. The door closed. Lee Min-jae stood alone at the top of his empire, above a city full of arrangements and transactions and the careful management of power, and he opened a letter that smelled like the one person he had spent 9 months trying to forget. He started reading. He didn't stop. Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers, and tell me where you're watching from. He read the letter twice standing up, and once on the way down the corridor. By the third reading, he had stopped registering the words individually, and was instead experiencing them the way you experience a structural failure. Not as a sequence of events, but as a single, total collapse arriving from every direction at once. He folded it back along its creases when he reached the east wing, and held it at his side, and did not allow his face to communicate anything to the 2 staff members who stepped aside as he passed. The east receiving room was on the ground floor, a space ordinarily used for guests who arrived in conditions requiring discretion, a category that, in the life of the J-Wolf Syndicate, covered a considerable range of circumstances. Dr. Yoon had converted it in the 40 minutes since the call came in with the focused efficiency that had made her indispensable. A portable warmer hummed in the corner. Medical equipment Min-jae didn't know he owned had materialized from somewhere in the compound's depths. The lighting had been adjusted to something softer. Dr. Yoon herself was standing near the door when Min-jae arrived, tablet in hand, and she read his face with the practiced neutrality of a woman who had been patching up the consequences of other people's decisions for 15 years without ever once indicating that she had opinions about them. He's stable, she said before he could ask. Core temperature is coming up. I've got him on a warming protocol, and I'll do a full assessment in the next hour. She paused. He's small. His weight concerns me more than anything else. He was not well fed in utero, and I don't think the postnatal nutrition was adequate either. Another pause, more deliberate. Whoever was caring for him was doing their best with very limited resources. That's my clinical read. Min-jae absorbed this without visible response. Is he in pain? No. He's been fed formula from a bottle in the blanket with him, and he's been sleeping since Officer Shin brought him in. He woke briefly when I took his temperature and went back down. She stepped slightly to the side, clearing his line of sight to the warmer in the corner. He's been asking for company, I think. He settles more when someone is close. Min-jae walked past her. The warmer was a small enclosed unit, the interior padded and heated to a precise temperature that the display on the side reported in green numerals. Inside, wrapped still in the blue blanket that had accompanied him from the gate, Dr. Yoon had chosen not to change it. Min-jae understood instinctively, because the scent on it was the only familiar thing the baby had, was his son. He stood over the warmer for a moment and looked. The child was small in a way that rearranged something fundamental in his chest. Not the abstract smallness of an infant described in statistics, but a specific, particular smallness that communicated fragility and resilience simultaneously, the way very new things do. The blue blanket was tucked around him loosely. One fist had worked free at the wrist and was resting open against the padding, fingers slightly curled, the nails impossibly small. Min-jae pulled the chair from the corner, positioned it next to the warmer, and sat. Then, with a deliberateness that was the closest he knew how to come to reverence, he reached into the warmer and drew back the edge of the blanket from the baby's face. The child stirred. Min-jae went very still. The baby's face moved through the slow sequence of expressions that newborns make when consciousness is arriving. A tension around the brow, a small movement of the mouth, the fist tightening and releasing. Then the eyes opened. Dark, unfocused in the way of very new eyes that are still learning what focusing means. They moved across the middle distance and found, eventually, the outline of Min-jae's face above them. They stayed there. Min-jae looked at his son, and his son looked back at him with the entire, solemn attention of someone encountering the world without any prior experience of disappointment. And something in Min-jae's chest performed an action he did not have existing vocabulary for. The jaw was his. He could see it already in the set of the small face. The same structural architecture, compressed into something that would take years to grow into its full shape, but was already, unmistakably, present. The brow was his. The particular quality of the stillness, even now, even at 3 weeks old, that was his too, and recognizing it in this context was an experience adjacent to looking into a mirror that reflected not what you were, but what you had once been, before the world had finished its work on you. The eyes were Seo-jun's. That was the thing that broke the last functional barrier Min-jae had been maintaining since he opened the letter. The shape of them, the quality of the attention in them, young and unguarded and already, somehow, oriented towards something beyond the immediate. Seo-jun had looked at him like that once. In the early months, before the syndicate's internal politics had begun their slow contamination of everything, when they had existed in the small private space of each other without strategy or positioning or the management of other people's perceptions. He had told himself, for 9 months, that the exile had been necessary. That Donghyun's intelligence was reliable. That Seo-jun's presence had become a liability, and that the decision, while difficult, had been correct. He had told himself this with the same disciplined repetition with which he managed every other uncomfortable operational reality, and it had worked in the way that sufficient discipline always works. Not by eliminating the feeling, but by making it small enough to function around. The letter had ended that. And now his son was looking at him with Seo-jun's eyes, and Min-jae was looking back, and the 9 months of disciplined management were dissolving with a completeness and a speed that left him, for the first time in longer than he could reliably remember, with nothing between himself and what he actually felt. He reached into the warmer and placed one hand, very gently, against the side of the baby's face. The warmth of it was extraordinary, that specific warmth of new life that has nothing to do with external temperature and everything to do with the simple fact of existing. The baby turned his face slightly toward Min-jae's palm in the instinctive way of newborns seeking contact, and the gesture was so uncalculated, so entirely without agenda, that Min-jae closed his eyes for a moment and breathed. "Ji-ho," he said quietly. The name from the letter. The name Seo-jun had chosen alone, in a one-room apartment with no heating and no help and a body that hadn't finished recovering, while Min-jae had been sitting at the top of his compound managing the logistics of an empire and telling himself that the past was operationally closed. The baby made a small sound, not distress, something softer than that. Recognition, perhaps, of a voice that shared frequencies with the only voice he had known until this morning. Dr. Yoon appeared in his peripheral vision, stopped, and silently withdrew. Min-jae did not move for a long time. He sat in the quiet warmth of the medical equipment with his hand against his son's face, and the letter in his other fist, and the full weight of what had been done. What he had allowed to be done, what he had been maneuvered into allowing, settling through him like cold water finding every crack. He was not a man who made promises lightly. He was not a man who made them to sleeping infants in borrowed blankets in the middle of the night, either. He made one now. "I know what I have to fix," he said, barely above a whisper, to the small face turned up toward his in the dark. "I know who I have to find." His thumb moved once, carefully, across the baby's cheek. "And I know what I have to dismantle first." Jiho's eyes had closed again, pulled back under by the particular gravity of new sleep, trusting and absolute. Min-jae stayed where he was and let him sleep, and thought about Ryu Donghyun's location in Gangnam, and began, quietly and with great precision, to plan. He didn't go to his office immediately. He sat with Jiho until the baby's breathing had deepened into the particular rhythm of genuine sleep, slow and even and entirely without reservation. And then he stood, adjusted the blanket one final time, and left Dr. Yoon with a single instruction to contact him directly if anything changed. She nodded without asking questions. He had always valued that about her. The office was on the 2nd floor of the main building, a room that contained nothing unnecessary. A desk, a single lamp, shelving along one wall holding documents that did not exist in any digital system. A window that faced north toward the city, which Min-jae left uncovered because darkness with a view had always suited his thinking better than darkness without one. He sat down. He placed the letter on the desk in front of him and looked at it for a moment without opening it. The tape, the careful fold lines, the slight warping of the paper where it had been handled too many times in the hours before it was left. Someone had read and reread this letter before sealing it. Someone had practiced letting it go. He opened it. Min-jae, I am not writing this to hurt you. I want you to know that first, because I know how it will look, a letter left with a baby at a gate. And I need you to understand that this is not an act of accusation. This is an act of arithmetic. I have added everything up, and this is what the numbers say. His name is Jiho. Lee Jiho, because he is yours, and I want him to carry that from the beginning. He was born 3 weeks ago in a public hospital in Nowon district. I was alone. The birth was difficult. I won't describe it in detail because it doesn't change anything, and I am trying to keep this letter to what matters. He is healthy, or he will be with proper care. He is small because I was not able to eat the way I should have. I worked until my 8th month, and the factory cut my hours in the 9th because I could no longer manage the line speed. I want to tell you that I managed. I mostly managed. I am writing this because I have a chest infection I cannot afford to treat, and a heat cycle that is 3 weeks overdue, and a bank account that will not cover next month's rent, and a body that is running on the wrong side of empty. I am writing this because I looked at Jiho this morning and I understood, with complete clarity, that loving him and being able to care for him are 2 different things, and that confusing them would cost him everything. You can give him what I cannot. I know what your compound has. I know what a child raised inside your world would have access to: medicine, safety, education. A future that isn't built on the edge of a financial collapse I cannot seem to pull us back from. I know you, Min-jae. Whatever happened between us, and I have spent 9 months trying to understand what that was, I know that you are not a man who abandons his blood. That is why I am trusting you with mine. There is no anger in this letter. I want to be clear about that. I spent the first 3 months being angry, but Jiho needed me calm, and the anger was expensive, and I let it go. What I have left is not bitterness. It is something quieter and harder to name. Something that lives in the part of me that still does not entirely understand how we arrived here. I was not a spy. I need you to know that. I don't know what you were told or who told you, but I need you to carry that information. Not for me. For Jiho, when he is old enough to ask about his other parent. Tell him that whatever else was true, that part was not. Please have him checked by a doctor immediately. He is small and his temperature runs low, and he needs more than I have been able to give him. Please do not let anyone in your circle make decisions about him without your direct involvement. Please, and I mean this as his parent to you, not as anything else. Please do not let him grow up thinking he was unwanted. He was wanted more than anything I have ever known. He is just owed more than I can give. I am going to be fine. I have a job, and I have a room, and I know how to manage on very little. I have been doing it for 9 months, and I know the shape of it now. Do not look for me. That is the one thing I am asking for myself. Let me know he is safe. You can leave a message with the guard who is on duty tonight. He will know how to reach me. And then let me go. Take care of him. Seo Jun. Min-jae read it through without stopping. Then he set it down on the desk and sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The lamp cast a narrow light across the room. Outside, the city continued its arrangements. Somewhere on the floor below, his son was sleeping in borrowed warmth. I was not a spy. 6 words. No elaboration. No argument constructed around them. Just the words themselves, placed with the quiet certainty of someone who has decided that the truth is the truth regardless of whether it is believed, and that stating it once is both sufficient and necessary. He thought about Donghyun and Gangnam. He thought about 9 months of silence that had not, he now understood, been silence at all, but rather a very carefully managed noise, designed to sound like nothing. He folded the letter back along its lines. He placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest. Then he picked up his phone and called June. In the morning, he said when June answered, I want everything. Every communication that passed through Donghyun's office in the last 12 months. Every order issued in my name that I did not personally sign. A pause. And find out where Seo Jun is working. Don't approach. Don't make contact. His voice was level and absolute and very quiet. Just find him. He ended the call. He sat in the dark office above the city and thought about a letter written by someone who had asked for nothing except to be left alone, and understood, with a clarity that felt like the aftermath of something breaking, that he had never intended to honor that request from the moment he finished reading. Dr. Yoon called at 4:47 in the morning. Min-jae was still at his desk. He had not slept. He answered before the second ring. His temperature dropped again, she said without preamble. I've stabilized it twice in the last hour, and it keeps sliding back. I need to bring in additional support. I have a neonatologist I trust, completely personally, and I need your authorization to make the call. Make the call. She'll need to come to the compound. She'll see the child. I understand what bringing someone here means, Dr. Yoon. Make the call. A brief pause. I also want to be transparent with you about what I'm observing. This baby has been cold for a long time. Not critically, not in the way that causes immediate damage, but chronically. His body has been working very hard to compensate for inadequate external warmth and inadequate caloric intake over an extended period. That kind of sustained effort takes a toll on a system this new and this small. Her voice remained clinical, but carried underneath it the particular weight of someone telling a truth they know will land hard. He is resilient. I want to say that clearly. He has been fighting, but he needs more support than I can provide alone tonight. Min-jae was already moving toward the door. I'll be there in 2 minutes. He was there in 90 seconds. The East receiving room had transformed again in the hours since he'd left it. A second warmer had been positioned alongside the first. Monitoring equipment tracked Jiho's vitals on a screen mounted at eye level. Heart rate, temperature, oxygen saturation. Numbers that Min-jae had no medical training to interpret, but found himself reading with intense, focused attention regardless. Dr. Yoon's assistant, a young man named Hwan who had said nothing to Min-jae in the 3 times their paths had crossed tonight except a sequence of respectful, minimal acknowledgments, was adjusting a line on the warmer with the careful precision of someone who understood that careful precision was what the moment required. Jiho was awake. That was the thing that stopped Min-jae in the doorway for a half-second. The baby's eyes were open, and they were tracking, and the expression on his small face was not distress exactly, but something adjacent to it. The look of someone experiencing discomfort they cannot yet name or communicate except through the quality of their wakefulness. Min-jae crossed the room and sat beside the warmer. "Hey," he said quietly. It was not a word he had deployed with any particular frequency in his adult life, but it was what arrived, and he had learned in the last few hours to stop auditing what arrived when he was in this room. "I'm here." Jiho's eyes moved to him. The monitoring equipment continued its quiet report. Dr. Yoon's neonatologist arrived at 5:30. A compact woman in her 40s named Dr. Lim, who entered the compound with the unruffled composure of someone accustomed to being called to difficult places at difficult hours, and had long since stopped finding it remarkable. She examined Jiho with thorough, unhurried attention while Min-jae stood against the wall and watched. And when she finished, she turned to him with the direct, undecorated manner of someone who considers clarity to be a form of respect. He's malnourished. His iron levels are low, his glucose has been unstable, and he has the physiological markers of a baby who has been cold and underfed for most of his short life. She held his gaze steadily. None of this is irreversible. I want to be very clear about that. He is small, but his lungs are good, his cardiac function is normal, and he has been compensating with a stubbornness that is frankly impressive for someone his age. With aggressive nutritional support and consistent warmth over the next 2 weeks, I expect full recovery. What does aggressive nutritional support mean in practical terms? Fortified feeding every 2 to 3 hours. Continuous warming. Supplemental iron. Daily monitoring of his weight and temperature. And someone with him consistently, not for medical reasons, but because proximity to a stable adult body temperature and a familiar voice is genuinely therapeutic for infants in his condition. She paused. It's not complicated care. It's just constant care. Then it will be constant, Min-jae said. Dr. Lim studied him for a moment with an expression that was not quite surprise. I'll draw up a full protocol for Dr. Yoon. I'd like to come back in 48 hours to reassess. She glanced at Jiho in the warmer, and something briefly and involuntarily human crossed her professional face. He's a fighter. Whatever the circumstances were, he worked very hard to get here. She left. Dr. Yoon left shortly after to prepare the feeding protocol. Hwan dimmed the lights on his way out without being asked. Min-jae pulled his chair directly beside the warmer and stayed. The 48 hours that followed had a texture unlike anything in his previous experience. He had maintained operational focus through crises that had lasted longer and carried objectively higher stakes. Territorial disputes, betrayals, situations where the cost of losing attention for a single hour could be measured in irreversible consequences. He knew how to be present under pressure. He knew how to override his body's requirements when the situation demanded it. This was different in a way he couldn't have predicted and didn't try to explain. He learned Jiho's patterns the way he had once learned the patterns of the city below, with patient, total attention, until what had been noise became signal. The small sound that meant hunger before the crying started. The particular way the fists tightened when the temperature dipped below comfort. The way he settled when Min-jae's voice entered the room, Not dramatically, but measurably. A slight slowing of the restlessness, a shift towards stillness. Your temperature is going up, Min-jae told him, on the morning of the second day, watching the number on the monitor climb past the threshold Dr. Yoon had marked in green. You're deciding to stay. Jiho was awake and looking at him with the solemn, comprehensive attention that Min-jae had come to understand was simply the way his son looked at things. Taking inventory. Assessing. Good, Min-jae said quietly. That's the right decision. By the end of the second night, the temperature held. Dr. Lim returned, conducted her assessment, and told Min-jae that the numbers were moving in the right direction with a speed that reflected well on the care provided. Min-jae received this information and did not leave the room. June appeared in the doorway at some point on the second evening with a report and a carefully neutral expression that communicated, without stating, that there was other business requiring attention. In the morning, Min-jae said, without looking away from his son. June withdrew. The monitoring equipment continued its quiet, faithful report. Outside, the city did what it always did. Inside the east receiving room, Lee Min-jae sat beside his son and did not move, and the numbers on the screen kept climbing, and Jiho kept fighting, and that was enough. On the morning of the third day, Min-jae left Jiho's side for the first time. He showered, changed, and ate something that June had left outside the office door. A container of rice and broth that had gone cold hours ago, consumed standing at the window without tasting it. Then he sat down at his desk and opened the files June had compiled overnight, and he began to read. It took 4 hours. It took 4 hours because Min-jae read everything twice. He was not looking for what was there. He was looking for the shape of what had been removed. The first thread appeared in a communication from 11 months ago, an intelligence summary regarding Omega contacts within the syndicate's peripheral network, authored by Dong Hyun, routed to Min-jae's office through the secondary channel used for sensitive personnel matters. Min-jae had no memory of reading it. He had a system, and the system required him to sign sensitive summaries before they were filed. There was no signature. There was a filing timestamp and a receipt confirmation and no signature, which meant the document had been filed without ever reaching his desk. He set it aside. The second thread was in the dismissal record. Min-jae kept physical copies of every personnel action, entries, exits, reassignments, disciplinary measures, because digital records could be adjusted and paper, once printed and signed, carried an evidentiary weight that screens did not. He pulled the dismissal file for Han Seo-jun and placed it under the lamp. His signature was on it. He studied it for a long time. The angle of the characters, the pressure distribution, the particular habit he had, in formal documents, of extending the final stroke of his name slightly longer than handwriting guides would recommend. A personal idiosyncrasy he had never mentioned to anyone and had never needed to, because no one had previously had reason to replicate it. Someone had needed to replicate it. The extension was there. Everything was there. It was very good work. It was the work of someone who had studied his signature with extended, deliberate attention. The kind of attention that required proximity and patience and a long view, none of which were remarkable attributes in a man who had served as his deputy for 6 years. He placed the document face down on the desk. The third thread was the one that completed it. A series of internal communications between Dong Hyun and a contact Min-jae recognized as belonging to a rival faction. Messages that had been routed through the syndicate's own secure channels with the casual confidence of someone who believed their position made them invisible. Information about Seo-jun's Omega status and perceived value as an intelligence asset. A fabricated assessment of intercepted communications that had never existed. A recommendation for immediate and permanent removal from the inner circle, framed as a security necessity. All of it dated to the same 2-week window, 9 months ago. All of it constructed while Seo-jun had been carrying a child no one in this building had known about except the person who had ensured it stayed that way. Min-jae closed the file. He called June. "Find Dong Hyun," he said. "Not his driver. Not his phone. Him. Physically. Bring him to the East Conference Room and tell him I want a debrief on the Incheon arrangement. Tell him there's been a development that needs his direct input." A pause. "Make it sound routine." "He's in the building," June said. "Arrived 20 minutes ago for the morning briefing. Pull him out of it quietly. I don't want the room unsettled before I'm ready." "Understood." "Sir, how do you want this handled after?" Min-jae looked at the forged dismissal document on his desk. "I'll tell you when I'm in the room with him." Dong Hyun arrived at the East Conference Room looking composed and carrying his tablet and projecting the particular ease of a man who has maintained a successful deception for long enough to have stopped experiencing it as a deception. He was 41, broad-shouldered, with a face that had always communicated reliability. The kind of face that made people extend trust the way they extend a hand, automatically, before they've decided to. Min Jae was standing at the window when he entered. "You said there was a development," Dong Hyun said, setting his tablet on the table. "There is." Min Jae turned from the window. "Sit down." Something in the quality of the instruction registered. Dong Hyun sat. Min Jae placed the forged dismissal document on the table in front of him and said nothing. The silence lasted 7 seconds. Min Jae counted. He watched Dong Hyun's face move through a rapid internal sequence: assessment, calculation, the brief consideration of a denial strategy, and then the particular stillness that arrives when a person understands that the specific situation they have always known was theoretically possible has become actual. "Min Jae, your access codes are already suspended," Min Jae said. "Your sidearm was removed from your office at 8 this morning. Your driver has been reassigned." He kept his voice level and even and entirely without heat, because heat would have implied this was personal, and what he needed Dong Hyun to understand was that it was structural. "You will be confined to the East Residential Suite until I determine the full scope of what you did. You will not communicate with anyone inside or outside this compound without my direct authorization. You don't have the complete picture. I have your communications with the Choi faction. I have the forged signature. I have 9 months of a filing system you believed I never personally reviewed." Min Jae picked up the document. "I have a complete picture. What I'm still developing is patience." Dong Hyun said nothing. "The child," Min Jae said, and watched something shift behind Dong Hyun's eyes. A flicker of what might have been surprise, or might have been the calculation of how much Min Jae knew. "You knew." It was not a question. Dong Hyun understood that, and didn't insult either of them by treating it as one. "I made a decision that was in the syndicate's interest," he said quietly. "You made a decision that was in your interest," Min Jae said. "And you used my name to execute it." He moved toward the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. "No one in this building discusses the child. No one mentions his existence, his arrival, or his presence in this compound to any person inside or outside these walls. That instruction applies to you before anyone else." He looked back. "June will show you to the suite." He left without waiting for a response. In the corridor, he paused. June was waiting. "How do you want me to brief the senior staff?" "You don't." "Not yet." Min Jae straightened his jacket. "I need to know the full reach of what Dong Hyun shared with outside contacts before this becomes a compound-wide conversation. Until then, the circle stays exactly as it is." "And his position?" "There is no position." Min Jae resumed walking toward the east wing. "Have someone bring Jiho's midday feeding." "I'll do it myself." June fell into step behind him and did not ask anything further, which was, as always, precisely correct. "Before I tell you what happens next, subscribe to Starry-Eyed Lovers and tell me where you're watching from." June brought the camera footage at noon. Min Jae had just finished Jiho's feeding, a process that had required 3 attempts, 2 adjustments to the bottle angle, and a period of patient negotiation that Min Jae had not anticipated and had engaged with the same focused attention he brought to everything, until Jiho had decided, apparently on his own terms and timeline, to cooperate. Dr. Yoon had observed this from the doorway with an expression. She had the professionalism to keep off her face entirely. Min Jae had noticed it anyway. He transferred Jiho back to the warmer, ensured the temperature reading was where Dr. Lim had specified, and went to the adjacent room where June had set up the secondary monitor. "North gate camera from 340 to 415, June said, pulling up the feed. "I've also pulled the road cameras from the lower access route and cross-referenced with the public transit network, where our coverage overlaps." The footage was gray and grainy in the way of pre-dawn recordings, but the resolution was sufficient. Min Jae watched Seo-jun come into frame. He had prepared himself, in the 40 seconds between sitting down and the footage beginning, for the experience of seeing him. He had believed this preparation would be adequate. It was not. Seo-jun moved through the camera frame with the particular careful economy of someone managing a body that hurt. Each step deliberate, the posture of a person redistributing weight away from something that hadn't healed correctly. The jacket was too large. The walk was slower than Min Jae remembered. Everything about the image communicated the same thing the letter had communicated, and the same thing Dr. Yoon's clinical assessment had communicated, and the cumulative effect of the 3 of them arriving again simultaneously was something Min Jae processed without expression and filed in the part of himself that was already decided. He watched Seo-jun kneel. Watched him place the baby. Watched him press his forehead down once, briefly, before he stood. Watched him walk away without turning back. "Freeze it there," Min Jae said. June paused the frame on Seo Jun's retreating figure at the edge of the camera's range. The worn jacket, the slight list to the left that suggested the chest cold, had settled deeper than Seo Jun was acknowledging. The absolute straightness of the spine that was doing the same work it had always done. Min-jae now understood, of presenting a composure that the rest of the body wasn't entirely endorsing. He turned south at the bottom of the access road, Jun said. I lose him on our cameras after that. But I picked him up on a public transit camera at Bukhansan Station at 4:31. He boarded a bus on the Guro line. Guro, Min-jae said. Industrial district. 3 major packaging facilities operating night and early morning shifts within a 10-minute walk of the station. 2 electronics assembly plants. 1 textile operation. June set a printed sheet on the desk beside the monitor. I have names and addresses. I also have street-level contacts in the district. 2 of them are reliable for this kind of quiet inquiry. Min-jae looked at the sheet without picking it up. What does quiet inquiry mean to you in this context? Means I send someone who doesn't look like someone, asking questions that don't sound like questions. Factory environments, people talk. A new Omega worker, recent slight build. That's a specific enough description to narrow it down without raising flags, if the inquiry is framed correctly. I want the inquiry framed as concern, not surveillance, Min-jae said. If anyone in his environment registers that he's being looked for, they'll tell him. He'll move. He paused. He's already primed to disappear. He said as much in the letter. We don't push him before we're ready to have him found. June nodded, making a small notation. There's one more thing. He pulled up a second window on the monitor. A still image captured from a different camera angle, timestamped 4:34. A bus interior, mostly empty at that hour, shot from the front-mounted transit camera. A figure in the back row, forehead against the window. It's not conclusive at this resolution. But the jacket matches, the build matches, and the Guro line timing is consistent. Min-jae looked at the image for a long moment. The figure in the back of the bus had their eyes open, focused on nothing visible through the glass, with the particular quality of someone who has done something that cannot be undone, and is now simply moving through the immediate aftermath of it. Moving because stillness would cost more than they had left. That's him, Min-jae said. He stood, moved to the window, and looked at the city in the early afternoon light. Somewhere in Guro district, in a factory that smelled of industrial solvent and recycled air, Han Seo-jun was standing at a line and telling himself he had made the right choice. He was running a heat cycle on discipline alone. His chest was infected, and his body was postpartum, and he had spent the last 9 months constructing a life out of materials that should not have been sufficient and had been barely, because Seo-jun had always been capable of a specific kind of endurance that Min-jae had once observed with something that had not, if he was precise about it, ever been purely professional admiration. He had been wrong about many things in the last 9 months. He was not wrong about that. The street contacts in Guro, activate both of them today, he said, without turning from the window. I want a confirmed location and employment detail by tomorrow morning. Name of the facility, shift hours, supervisor if possible. Another pause. And I want medical intelligence. His condition. Not from him, from anyone in proximity who might have noticed. The chest infection, the heat cycle. I need to know what I'm walking into before I walk into it. And when we have a confirmed location, you bring it to me directly. No intermediaries, no written record of the address until I've decided how to proceed. Min-jae turned from the window. He asked me not to look for him. June waited. I'm aware of that, Min-jae said. I'm also aware that the letter was written by someone who expected to be taken at their word because they had never, in the time I knew them, said anything they didn't mean. He straightened his jacket, which means the request was genuine, which means honoring it would be, under different circumstances, the correct response. But not these circumstances. He has a heat cycle he can't manage, and a chest infection he's not treating, and a body that delivered a child 3 weeks ago and hasn't rested since. Min-jae's voice remained even, but beneath the evenness was something with weight and temperature. The request was genuine. The circumstances that produced it were manufactured by someone who is currently confined to my East residential suite. That changes the calculation. June picked up the printed sheet from the desk. I'll have the Guro contacts activated within the hour. One more thing, Min-jae said as June moved toward the door. When we find him, and we will find him, the approach is mine. No one else goes near him. No syndicate presence, no escort, nothing that reads as what we are before I've had the chance to be something else first. He paused. He has enough reasons to run. I'm not giving him another one. June left. Min-jae returned to the monitor and looked at the frozen image of the bus interior. The figure in the back row, the window, the gray pre-dawn city sliding past in the background. He studied it with the patience of someone memorizing something important, the way you memorize things you're afraid of losing again. Then he went back to his son, and he waited, and he let the city do its work. The nursery was finished by the time Min-jae returned from the evening briefing. He stopped in the doorway and looked at it for a moment without entering. He had given the instructions 4 days ago. In the hours between leaving Jiho's side to deal with Dong-hyun and returning to the East receiving room. A series of precise directives delivered to the compound's facilities manager that had been received with the careful absence of visible reaction that Min-jae's staff had perfected over years of being asked to do unusual things efficiently and without commentary. A room on the east wing's upper floor, south-facing for the light. Warm tones. Nothing clinical. A crib built for permanence, not transit. They had done well. The room was small by the compound standards and exactly right by every other measure. A crib against the wall with a warming function built into the base. Dr. Yoon's specification, incorporated without being asked. A chair positioned beside it at an angle that suggested long occupancy. A lamp in the corner that produced the same quality of light Min-jae had adjusted to over 4 nights in the east receiving room. Soft enough for a sleeping infant, sufficient for a watching adult. A shelf along one wall, currently empty, which would in time hold whatever Jiho decided to accumulate. Min-jae crossed the room, lifted his son from the portable warmer that had made the journey upstairs, and settled into the chair. Jiho was awake and in the particular mood he occupied in the late evenings. Not restless, not hungry, but alert in a way that seemed oriented toward something specific, some internal process of cataloging and cross-referencing that Min-jae had decided to take seriously. He was a week past the medical crisis now. His temperature held consistently without intervention. His weight, per Dr. Lim's assessment that afternoon, had increased by enough to move from concerning to encouraging. His iron levels were climbing. He was, in Dr. Lim's precise language, demonstrating excellent trajectory. Min-jae looked at his face in the lamp light and thought about trajectory. "You've had a difficult 4 days," he said quietly. Not to himself. He had stopped doing that somewhere in the second night of the medical watch, when he had understood that Jiho's response to his voice was not incidental but consistent, and that speaking into the room without direction was a waste of something that was actually working. "You handled it well." Jiho's eyes moved to him with the solemn, total attention that Min-jae had come to recognize as his son's default mode of engagement with the world. As if everything encountered deserved the same quality of consideration, from the ceiling above the warmer to the face of the person holding him. It was, Min-jae had reflected more than once, an unsettling amount like looking in a mirror. And an unsettling amount like looking at someone else entirely. "The room is yours," Min-jae said. "I know you have no frame of reference for what that means yet. But it's yours. The compound is yours. Everything I've spent 12 years building." He paused, and something in the pause had an unfamiliar quality. The quality of a man arriving at a sentence he hadn't planned and finding it more accurate than anything he could have prepared. It was never for anything, specifically. I understood its purpose as the thing itself. The having and the holding and the management of it. He looked at his son. "It has a purpose now." Jiho made the small sound that meant contentment. A soft, brief exhale that Min-jae had logged and cataloged the way he logged everything that mattered. "Your father is going to be found," Min-jae said. His voice was even and quiet, and carried beneath it the same absolute quality that his instructions carried in the conference room. Except that this was not an instruction. It was something with a different structure, older, less managed. Not because I have the resources to find him, though I do. Not because I have people looking in Guro District as of this afternoon, though I do. He shifted Jiho slightly, the adjustment his arms had learned in 4 days of practice. Because he deserves to be found. Because what was done to him was done using my name and my authority, and the correction of that is mine to make. The lamp cast its narrow warmth across the room. Outside, the compound ran its nighttime operations, perimeter checks, shift changes, the quiet machinery of an empire maintaining itself. Min-jae was aware of all of it and present to none of it. He said not to look for him, he said. "I've thought about that. I've thought about whether honoring it would be the more respectful choice, whether the letter was a boundary, and this is a violation of it." Jiho's hand had found Min-jae's finger in the way it had begun to do with reliable frequency, the grip small and definitive. "I've decided it would be the easier choice, not the more respectful one." He made that request from inside a situation that was constructed by someone else's lie. "I am not obligated to honor the terms of a surrender that should never have been demanded." He looked down at the small fingers wrapped around his. What I am obligated to do, he said more quietly, is be worth finding. When I get to him, and I will get to him, I need to be something different from what I was when he left. He paused. I'm aware that this is a significant undertaking for a man of my particular formation. I'm prepared to treat it with appropriate seriousness. Jiho looked up at him. I will find him, Min-jae said. The words arrived without performance, without the deliberate weight he placed on statements meant to be heard by rooms. They were the kind of words that don't require an audience because they are made to the part of yourself that will remember them regardless. And this time, I will not let go. The lamp continued its quiet work. Jiho's grip on his finger held. Min-jae sat in the room that had been built in a single night for a child who had arrived without warning, in the middle of an empire that now had a purpose it hadn't had a week ago, and he did not move for a long time. Somewhere in Guro district, in a one-room apartment that smelled of factory work and the specific exhaustion of a person running on the last of everything, Han Seo-jun was sleeping. He did not know that the most dangerous man in Korea had made him a promise. He did not know that the nursery existed, or the chair, or the shelf along the wall waiting to hold whatever Jiho would one day choose to accumulate. He did not know that his son had gained weight, or that his temperature held, or that the man he had trusted with Jiho's life had not put the letter down since the night he read it. He was sleeping, and Min-jae, across the city, was watching his son breathe and thinking about Guro district and the quality of a specific kind of endurance he intended, this time, not to leave alone in the dark. The city ran on below them both, full of its arrangements. This one was just beginning.